This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. Once again, it's my pleasure to have with us the phenomenal Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck. welcome here.
I'm a phenomenon of some description.
Yes,
I'm not sure what.
Well, we've had a lot of discussions on many different things. I normally start out with some kind of comment about a frustrated political career. But remember, the door is still open.
All I will say is...
And you could, if people approached you, you might respond in a positive way.
My only word of wisdom in this regard is H.L. Mencken's, a statesman is a dead politician.
Okay. On that note, let's proceed along. Now, I'm going to just use a phrase that I've heard about police officers, and the idea is that they are sort of armed social workers attempting to enforce the social contract. Now, may I ask, what would be your definition of a social contract?
A social contract, well, there's the ideological, theoretical ivory tower definition, and then there is the real world definition, such as it is, if a social contract really truly does exist in the real world. Which would you like? Either, both?
Well, go for both.
Well, the ivory tower version would be that a social contract is a foundation of a society that its identifying characteristic is that the society very self-consciously comes together at a particular time, at a particular place, in particular circumstances, and says, we hereby do create this government, this society, and we give up our some degree of our natural liberties to this society in order for this society to protect the remainder of our liberties.
Right.
That's the ivory tower version. The real version, if it exists, is if we in the United States here operate according to a social contract, nobody ever gave me the opportunity to sign on the dotted line or not. They have informed me that I am a party to the social contract and must accept its terms.
Okay,
that's a contract of adhesion if it's a contract at all.
Okay, now I know you have you're in the middle of the legal world these days, yes. But what would be a legal contract? How would you, you've said, well, this, and we can discuss this, so this contract is out there. Is a non-signed social contract a real contract? What would a lawyer say if you were going to put a contract there? What would it be? How would you do it?
It's freedom of will. That I have to, of my own free will, enter into this agreement. That's one. I could sit here and talk about capacity and consideration and stuff, but that's the biggie. And I think we've talked about this at some distant point in the past. The difference between contract and status is the pronoun. If I use the first person pronoun, I will or will not do this. Mm-hmm. That's a contract. That's freedom of will. That's giving me the choice. Whereas if we change it to second person, you will do that. Well, you're my serf. You're my slave. You are determined by your status and have no choice in it. So.
Yeah, yes. So, what we're getting into is, I guess, to me, misperceptions of what's going on here. So, point number one with a social contract is this is a weird kind of thing because the obligations and responsibilities are not clearly spelled out. You're the social contract. Well, firstly, there's no obvious statement about what I'm supposed to do and what society is supposed to do for me. There's no obvious statement about that.
Well, I'd say the Constitution, perhaps, but
maybe.
It's a very vague document.
The other point about this is that no one has ever signed the contract or understood the terms. And there's no language in there as to when the social contract is violated. So you made your initial definition, I think, goes back to Lockean world, or a lot of political philosophers say, coining the term, maybe going to Voltaire, whatever, Rousseau rather, in any event, that's the way that we do this. And if you really thought there was a social contract, if a person violated the social, you say in as external observer, well, you violated the social contract, which has been unsigned, and we're going to therefore punish you, or you're going to get benefits that are come to you because you're part of the social contract. And the confusion that each person has about this, I think, provokes all kinds of problems. And maybe I can now flip the conversation to the origin of much wisdom in the Western world. That's France, where Rousseau, Voltaire came from. And right now they're having these big riots over the yellow vests who believe that the taxes that have been put there are unfair and they're rioting. So maybe we could get into that a little bit. We also have taxation without representation or whatever. So in this social contract, I think the idea is that we would have a, quote, democratic government, and what you would do is you would surrender some of your authority to a person that's going to represent you in regards to this social contract, and that there are going to be negotiations on your behalf. And then out of these negotiations, presumably benefits and obligations will come to you. And that's as much as people have thought about it. But then when the obligations appear that seem to be against your best interest, there's almost nothing to do except riot. Yes. And I'll let it go at that and then go to the next point. Do you think taxes, the tax system is a big part of the obligations that exist to make everything work? So you get fire engines, you get different advantages. The airplanes can fly, presumably. There's going to be some attention to clean water. The crime will be stopped. All these benefits come from paying taxes. Mm-hmm. And if the taxes, however, could be so onerous that you could be destroyed by them, and then so in France that seems to be the case. So what went wrong with the social contract in France that caused these riots?
Well, to answer that, let me actually back up a little bit, both in terms of our conversation and in history. I think that the social contract, an actual working social contract, is a more practical thing if you're dealing with smaller, more homogeneous groups. The classic example of the social contract in the United States, and the social contract is a really big deal for us here in the United States because to a degree it's our lived experience, is the Mayflower Compact, in which I believe every male member of that excursion actually sat down and signed this document saying, almost verbatim, we're hereby creating a society. And since you could do that on a small level, it actually seemed to work. Right. The problem that you're dealing with in France or really in any society today is the society is just so big that you have elected as your agents politicians who may or may not truly represent your interests. And if your interests are diverse, if you're ethnically diverse, if you're economically diverse, which you're going to be in an industrial society with a lot of specializations, then you start feeling that this is not my contract. I'm not a party to this. This is too remote from me, and it's just taking my stuff without my own personal consent.
Okay, let's continue. I think we're onto something here.
Yes.
Let's continue with this. So one of the issues, first we say, no one has ever signed the contract, and many times the contract can be injurious, and the obligations that are being fostered upon you are many times presumably out of your control. You have some knowledge of fairness or what society is supposed to do. And in France, I guess you could say, well, they're rural people that drive their cars, and they're right on the edge of poverty, and they're just a little more taxes just destroys them. Yes. And the system is just working against them. The only thing to do is to reject the system.
Well, it's what happened in 1789.
Right, just exactly. To continue on the subject. So really, now the burdens that are being placed on a person in society are escalating enormously all the time. And that's freedom of speech, behavior, different kinds of things that are being enforced on people by different regulations. I mean, maybe you can't. I mean, I'll say whatever. Maybe you can't burn trash. I don't know. When there's a lot of smog out there, whatever. Well, maybe that has some kind of connection. But on the other hand, you can't, I don't know, you can't farm a patch of land because there's a certain kind of frog that lives there. And these regulations are just increasing and increasing and increasing with not any kind of obvious social contract. And the question to ask is, what are the benefits that are appearing that are on the other side of that? They would say, well, this is a fair social contract.
Well, I would say, as a mealy-mouthed politician, well, you're benefiting from this. It will help everything overall. So shut up and keep paying your taxes,
or following our regulations.
Yes. It reminds me of a line that Bill Clinton said during, I believe, his first fairly early on during his first term as presidency. He said, "Think of taxes as your contribution to society."
Yes.
And the response to that is a contribution is voluntary.
Right.
If I decided to withhold my contribution, the nice people from the IRS and the U.S. Marshals would come back.
Yes.
So I think that's what you're seeing, and the American Revolution, and I think what was in the great scheme of things the vastly more important French Revolution began over this question of taxes and this disconnect that the people had from those who were levying the taxes.
Which is, just looking at the situation, very, very difficult to have a sense of fairness. That's an important issue, fairness. So whatever a person thinks, this social contract is working pretty well. So to ask the question, I think people recognize all the pain that's being inflicted upon them very easily. The good part of it, though, is often dismissed. So, I don't know, you have shelter. People, in general, you can get enough to eat. In general, no one cuts your throat. In general, there are no foreign armies marching through, and you have some possibility of redress in the courts. You can watch the physical, I guess, advantages of the world are more than ever. If you grew up in 1950 in South Georgia, whatever the story was, or 1900. All these incredible positive things have happened. You can I don't know, air conditioning, this and this and this and this. Many, many, many positive material things have happened. And healthcare has been really a good, but people tend not to, I guess, recognize the connection. So many people, in regards to this social contract, they're aware of the regulations about burning, I don't know, firewood or whatever, or maybe some gun regulation, but they don't really pay much attention to the fact that you could now go to Los Angeles very inexpensively, or they're safe in their homes, or that their life expectancy is up by 20 years, or if they have something terrible that happens to them, there's pain relief somewhere. Yes. All those things are not considered much.
Things are easy to overlook, the hierarchy of needs, I suppose. But is it possible theoretically for you to have a society, or a society that is at least nominally founded on the social contract, to shift most or all of the burdens of that society onto person A, and shift all of the benefits of that society onto person B?
Well, you made my next point beautifully, Bucky. That's exactly the point about what's up here. So what I'd like to get into is the idea of a policeman going into let's say a tough area, and to enforce the social contract and what's going on there. And so in general, the social contract there, firstly, no one's ever signed it. Secondly, there's the burdens pretty much that exist there would merely be not injuring anyone. That's about it. Mm-hmm. The burden is not, you just can't injure anyone, and you're going to get something. You're going to get something. Maybe you get, I don't know, food stamps, whatever. You'll get something. And your requirements are very small. It may be one of the requirements, we've sort of touched on this, be to vote a certain way. We could say that. But so that sort of arrangement is very questionable. And the idea that a policeman is really an enforcer of, which I started our conversation with, is the enforcer of a social contract. That an external person would say, well, this is a pretty good deal for you. All you have to do is just not shoot anyone. On the other hand, a person in that situation looks at what the social contract is doing for other people and believes that it discriminates so much against them that any activity is reasonable. And that the reason being that someone else is driving a big car or flying in the jet airplane and the person is unable to do that. So they see inequities, which we've discussed liberty and inequality, but there is an inequality in benefits that are appearing for the social contract. There is an inequality. And there is also an inequality in obligations that appear there. So everyone is getting some kind of individual deal here about the way the social contract is working. It's unsigned, and the perception is, and many people, that this social contract is unfair because the other person is flying the jet plane, and there's no appreciation of what exactly is going on for that person to be in the jet plane. How he got there, and I'll make this point and then toss the ball to you. Okay, that's one viewpoint. The other viewpoint is that many people we've mentioned, let's say the contract for different behavioral issues. So I'm going to I don't know, whatever, I'll say this. I'm going to go to medical school, and then this is what I will receive out of that. I'll get this, and I'll get that, and I'll get this, and I'll get that. And it turns out that whatever what you imagined the deal was not clearly spelled out. And it turns out the rewards for this arrangement are not what you imagined you would get. Or another example might be a young person that goes to the university and imagines that these things are going to happen. Maybe from a poor family, they go to the university, and then they matriculate, and then there are no job openings, there's nothing, there's this, there's nothing. So then there's a tremendous bitterness that occurs when it appears the social contract is not working out, and it becomes a very corrosive kind of arrangement. Just to continue, my final point is, you could say in Russia, directly before the Soviet Union occurred or whatever, you could say the misunderstanding and the way the social contract was working in Imperial Russia was just, people considered it unfair and just bad. So everyone sacrificed their life fighting the Germans, and then they failed. This happened. Everyone took their money. They don't have this, they don't have that, and they see the lords and the nobles just living it up.
Yes.
And so the pervasive unfairness turns out to be a big deal. And so understanding the nuances of the social contract might be a very important thing.
Yes. It reminds me of a line that Robert Kennedy once said while he was Attorney General. He was making a speech, and he was saying, people have asked me the keys to my success, and well, the keys are that I worked, studied very hard in college, and I worked very hard as an attorney, and I had a brother who was elected president.
Yes.
That vagaries of the system, you can do everything right and still not get what you want, and sometimes it's pure luck that picks you out, and it's not fair. And people who have not had the system work for them, I would say, okay, so you went to medical school and you did this and did that, and then you didn't get what you wanted. Well, you picked the wrong profession to go into. You picked the wrong medical school. You picked the wrong field of specialization.
Right, yes.
Whose fault is it?
Right. Yes.
So now you can do it right. You could you could go to Harvard. You could go to UVA Medical School. You could pick neurosurgery, and then something happens. We all become cyborgs, and there are no more neural systems.
Right. Yes.
And nobody saw it coming.
Right.
Is there? Well, I'll give you an example from the real world. My wife, Carol, specialized in Russian history, not so much Soviet history, but Russian history. And she took her PhD in 1991 as the Cold War ended.
Right, yes. Bad timing.
Nobody saw that coming with that particular timing.
Yes.
Is there someone to blame there? And if so, who?
So just, I think this is an interesting issue here. So people, firstly, the social contract is not signed. It's not spelled out. The guarantees that people imagine are there are not there. And then people see other people that seem to have obtained a better deal. And so there can be solutions, and let's discuss one of the solutions, or maybe a faux solution. Let's pick Cuba. So you had all the things going on now, and then if you go to Cuba, well, allegedly, the social contract is very pervasive. There are relatively not much difference between people. Everybody gets the same thing. It's no matter, very little to do anything. So you could say that the enforced equality of the arrangement seems fair. Unless and how you would think it would be not fair would be that another system exists somewhere else that you could have gotten a better deal. But for most people in those circumstances, they might think, well, this is okay. And the big deal is having access to knowledge of other social contracts and how you're faring in your particular system. And if the society can close out all other information, then it may stabilize things. And what destabilizes it would be that if the country can't do what it says it's going to do. In Cuba, when the Soviet Union cracked up, well, everything sort of went to hell. Additionally, all the emigres in Miami, they sent food back, and so they get the information that this is a difficult story. Mm-hmm. And I'll throw one other example out there, and this is, I'll pick Brazil and the favelas that exist there. So you have this tremendous inequality in wealth and actually in ethnicity. People live in the favelas right next to the rich people, and it's a terrible situation. A rich person, poor person, the rich person has all this, and it seems to be just on the basis of being born that way. And the sense of unfairness provokes an incredible amount of crime, which doesn't exist, for better or worse, in Cuba. And so, can we parse that out a little bit? You want to try that?
Yeah, it's, when you were talking about Cuba, I was thinking about the Russian experience. And you mentioned the Russians who rebelled in 1917, 1918. And fast forward 20 years, and the system wasn't working for them. It obviously wasn't working for them in 1917, 1918. How did they feel? Did they feel that Stalin was an improvement? Mm-hmm. And for that matter, once the Soviet Union collapsed, is Putin today an improvement over
yes.
Gorbachev or Andropov or?
Well, maybe we can ask the question about what I'm getting into, I guess, mm-hmm. is trying to understand the social contract and as an explanation for a sense of unfairness mm-hmm. that then causes violent upheavals. And the idea to put some kind of stable system in place is extremely difficult, mm-hmm. and a fair system, for a social contract for the whole world.
Yes.
So what I would say is to really stabilize the world, some kind of substantial arrangements need to happen to allow that to occur. And it's extremely difficult and vexing because at every turn of the page, other social contracts exist, and it's hard to imagine that you have a fair social contract. Even if you were at the top of the heap, you might think, well, even though I've got this tremendous social contract, I always wanted to play pro football and it didn't work, or something like that. I don't know, whatever the story is. I mean, so people find a way just to be dismissive.
So I'm hearing a little envy of Tommy Lee Jones here. So.
Well, Tommy, if you're out there, I won't make any comments.
You could have been a contender.
I'm going to spare any comments on Tommy Lee. I will let you go in peace.
Well, I think you have an interesting point here that people don't realize. If they engage in a revolution, if they decide to change the rules of the game, to swap up to a better social contract, they perhaps don't stop to reflect sufficiently on what they have to lose if things go wrong. Yes. I mean, if they genuinely feel they have nothing left to lose, And there have been plenty of circumstances in history where people could reasonably think that.
Right.
We go back to Russia in 1917. This is anecdotal. I suppose our mutual friend Jamie Cockfield can enlighten us on this. But the Imperial Russian Army was rounding up civilians, women, children, old men, and stuffing them into the trenches with no weapons, no training, sending them over the top just to be cannon fodder so the Germans would run out of ammunition.
Right.
In that situation, yes, I'd say you've got nothing to lose by staging a revolution.
Right. Well, now just considering this, so I'll ask this question. Why did the Soviet Union crack up? And could we say, for three reasons. Number one is the social contract was not doing what it promised it was going to do. It was not giving huge benefits to people. They weren't getting this, they weren't getting that. Secondly, the people that were meritorious there, that thought, well, I could really do something, and I know this system is wearing me down. I'll make a joke about maybe I won't. I was going to discuss the VA, but I'll let it go. Yes. I won't do that. But in any event,
they could go to a place that did reward initiative.
Right. Well, so you're there, and this story was we pretend to work, they pretend to pay us, and there was a lot of frustration. It's just the system I'm just miserable here. I'm stuck. I could do great things, but the system is not allowing me to do that. And then the third reason might be that they became aware of a better, or at least a system elsewhere, where all the cornucopia of goodies was occurring, and the Russian state, or Soviet Union state, was not able to successfully keep this knowledge away from people. They couldn't. Western tourists arrived. Little relatives, little hints that things were better on the other side. Maybe East Germany is a good example, where they had some things, but just across the wall, things were great. And so that extraordinary experiment imploded, I guess you could say. On the other hand, there could be some things, if you're looking at world dynamics, is there any lesson that could be learned? What could come out of that experience? If we were going to try, what should have happened after the Russian Revolution in regards to a social contract?
I really don't know. I mean, partly because I believe at a deep-seated level, that Marxism is just fatally flawed. That's not to say that, that's not to say that capitalism is perfect.
Well, of course it's flawed. Absolutely. So, I mean, it's just a very simple. It's a simplistic explanation for complicated things.
It doesn't take the concept of human selfishness hardwired into us.
There's no idea. It's a very, very limited view of human behavior.
It's naive.
Of course it is. Yeah. It's very naive.
But the problem is that equality, if you're going for true equality in material matters and that sort of thing, equality means we're all equally poor. And what do you do with that?
I would say it's unnatural. In other words, the instinct, so we have some kind of gradations. I guess what I'm getting into is what is going to be the appropriate world system for the 21st century? What's going to be a good way to make that work?
The rising tide. Something that incentivizes hard work. That's, and I'm talking like a trickle-down Reaganomics person here, supply side, but I don't think Keynes works. But how do you do that? For somebody who hasn't had the good breaks and hasn't had the good lucks, that's an awfully hard pill to swallow.
Well, I'll make one final comment on this, is that the system, it's hard to make the system totally fair. So if you're a person that you have big muscles and your father worked, I don't know, as a stevedore, and you'd like to too, and there's no such job, and the abilities that you have, that you were born with, are insufficient to give you everything you wish to have, then that's a substantial problem, and we have to brood about it.
That's the only thing we can do.
Okay, on that note, thank you for being here tonight, Bucky. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
much.